Somalia.
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 He hugged, kissed, and applauded because the Somali soldier had passed the Turkish exam.
What did you do after waking up this morning?
I got up early in the morning, took a shower, brushed my teeth, then did my ablution and prayed.
Mashallah.
Minister of National Defense Hulusi Akar was impressed that Somali soldiers learned Turkish in a short time.
We will work for the homeland. Everything is for the homeland.
I'm a Somali commando!
I'm a Somali commando.
I'm everywhere!
I'm everywhere. In the air.
In the air!
On land. On land.
At sea! At sea! In the fork!
In the fork.
In the swamp!
In the swamp.
I'm everywhere.
I'm everywhere.
I remember the first day we landed in Somalia. We all saw the tears in his eyes. "We're leaving for Somalia tomorrow morning," he said, without hesitation. It was a moment that changed the modern history of Somalia.
We have all heard of leaders who changed the destiny of their own countries. But how many leaders do you know who changed the destiny of another country?
The African continent resembles the head of a rhinoceros. Somalia is located right at the tip of this horn, in the region known as the Horn of Africa. Somalia has the longest coastline in Africa, and contrary to what is commonly believed, its land is quite fertile. Isn't it a bit strange that Somalia, with an economy that relies on agriculture for nearly 70%, has become the epicenter of hunger and famine?
This should be one of the last places where issues like hunger and famine are discussed.
In fact, it is a country that could be one of the richest in the world, with fertile lands and some of the richest fish stocks in the world.
The country has hundreds of kilometers of coastline both to the east and south. The sea is abundant with fertile fish, and while there may be desert climates in certain areas, Somalia also has very fertile and productive lands.
In the livestock sector, it's almost a meat reservoir, yet it has come to struggle with hunger and poverty.
There is actually no reason for Somalis to be hungry, poor, or impoverished.
In that case, the source of the humanitarian crisis in Somalia needs to be sought elsewhere. Like all African countries, Somalia shares a colonial past.
The British and Italians competed with each other to plunder the country from the late 1800s until 1960. Of course, there would be only one true loser in such a cruel competition. The so-called independence granted to many African countries in 1960 was also given to Somalia. The Somali people had just begun to taste independence and stability when General Siad Barre staged a military coup in 1969 and ruled Somalia as a dictator until 1991. Siad Barre lost control as a result of uprisings against him. Consequently, Somalia was plunged into a long civil war that continues to this day, leading to the collapse of the state as a functioning entity.
Of course, at that time Somalia was emerging from the civil war and was left to its own devices. The state mechanism had completely collapsed and people were left to face their fates individually.
In any region of the world, wherever it may be, if a state has failed, hunger, misery, poverty, and all kinds of calamities will naturally arise there. The negative consequences brought about by that failed state have now devastated Somalia.
This is the story behind the images that come to mind when we think of Somalia. 6 million of the country's 13 million inhabitants do not have access to enough food. Somalia experienced perhaps the worst famine in its history in 2011, when 260,000 people lost their lives. The world and the United Nations were not fulfilling their duties, and Somalia was condemned to starvation in front of the eyes of the whole world. Someone had to take immediate action for Somalia.
Dark continent Africa is struggling with drought and famine. Millions of people in Somalia are living close to death.
Believe me, if they gave even the crumbs from the cuffs of their trousers, it would lift Africa up.
In the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu, a reporter from TV2 who entered a warehouse encountered thousands of tons of food supplies given by the United Nations that had not been distributed.
Turkey is mobilized to help
the Somalis suffering
from hunger. As aid distribution continues in the country, it is now preparing for Prime Minister Erdoğan's visit on August 18th.
We will act as if no one else is in Africa.
I remember the day we first landed in Somalia. There was drought, and news was coming in about thousands of people dying. The images were horrific. We couldn't even watch them. When we told our president that the situation was very bad and suggested starting a relief campaign to at least draw the world's attention here, he asked, "What is the full picture?" and looked at the footage. We all saw that his eyes filled with tears. It was Ramadan. He said, "We're leaving for Somalia tomorrow morning," without any hesitation. And the teams worked through the night, preparing, loading aid supplies onto planes and so on. The next day, we landed in Somalia. That was a moment that changed the modern history of Somalia.
It was a Turkish leader who took the first step into Somalia, where no leader from outside Africa had visited for 22 years.
On August 19, 2011, our president's call to the world, his commitment and his initiation of a genuine Africa aid program was not just rhetoric but actual implementation. Until that day, many developed countries compared to wealthier nations would spend millions of dollars merely for PR, holding meetings in New York, Geneva, and United Nations gatherings, focusing on the literature of hunger and poverty, keeping statistics like how many babies died in what way and how many mothers died during childbirth. They conducted aid in a symbolic manner, and unfortunately, many countries did not distribute the aid they promised. We saw the harsh realities of such practices.
To prove that Western values are not just empty rhetoric, the civilized world must pass this test successfully.
So, what made Erdoğan's visit to Somalia significant enough to change the country's history? Perhaps the best answer to this question could come from Somalia itself.
That visit of 19th August 2011 was not a visit only, but it was a visit that changed the history of Somalia, the life of millions of Somalis, and visit that created a new hope for more millions of Somalis.
At a time when there was debate in many Western capitals about whether there was even an airport in Mogadishu, our president made a historic landing at Mogadishu airport with both his family and a large delegation.
Against all advice, our president exhibited strong resolve and unwavering dedication to Somalia, showcasing his firm determination and unwavering commitment despite the forewarnings received from various sources.
More, without wearing a bulletproof vest and without any fear, he visited the tents in the streets of Mogadishu one by one, accompanied by his wife, family, and entire large delegation.
Because it was more than just a visit.
Prime Minister Erdoğan aimed to draw the world's attention to Somalia with his visit, which was conducted with a large delegation. Indeed, he succeeded in this. Immediately after the visit, Erdoğan wrote an article titled "Somalia's Tears" for International Foreign Policy magazine. He reminded the world that not only the drought but also the international community's abandonment of Somalia was a fundamental factor underlying this humanitarian drama.
In a world where no one hears Somalia's cries, no one can speak of peace, justice, or civilization.
Erdoğan's call may not have reminded the great powers of Somalia's cries, but it did remind them of their interests in Somalia.
Mary Harper, a Somali analyst for the British news agency BBC, wrote that she detected a note of concern in the voice of a British Foreign Office official when discussing the Turkish flags hanging in every street in Somalia. This concern would soon become concrete, as a few months later, the British decided to reopen their embassy in Somalia, which had been closed for 22 years. Western states had been in the region for years solely for their own interests. When the country was plunged into chaos, they had seen no issue in abandoning Somalia to its fate.
However, Turkey went there not for its own interests, but purely out of humanitarian concern, at a time when Somalia was perhaps at its most dangerous and in greatest need.
We do not want embassies working with such an informant mentality. God willing, we will achieve this too.
Aid in the health sector for Somalia will be further increased.
The Recep Tayyip Erdoğan Training and Research Hospital in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, provides care for patients in a country plagued by terrorism, famine, and poverty.
When we exit the airport, it feels almost like going on a safari. That's why we hope to quickly complete the road between the airport and the city.
Mogadishu International Airport will be renovated with Turkey's financial support and aid by 2015.
Somalia is now getting back on its feet with the helping hand extended by Turkey.
Such humanitarian aid has been collected under the name of humanitarian aid.
For the first time in world history, such a successful aid campaign was recorded in the literature. In about a month, nearly $100 million in aid was collected.
The 2011 visit was not limited to sending food or health aid to Somalia. As a political step, Turkey activated its embassy in Mogadishu. This was an indication that we recognized Somalia, which everyone ignored. The next step was to ensure that Somalia became self-sufficient in food, the most fundamental problem of Somalia.
In fact, until the 1970s, the situation in Somalia was like this. Somalia was self-sufficient, with a rural economy based on barter among nomadic herders and small farmers. However, as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, intervened in Somalia, this economic model began to deteriorate. The IMF's and global capital's colonial methods were somewhat more complex than those of colonial powers. Instead of facilitating Somalia's debt repayment, the IMF imposed its own economic program on the country. This program led to the liberalization of Somalia's grain market, increasing the country's dependence on imported grains. As food aid to Somalia increased 15-fold over a decade, products like wheat and rice became cheaper in the domestic market. This situation displaced local producers from both their jobs and their land. The IMF not only decimated agriculture in Somalia, but also demanded a devaluation of the Somali currency in 1981, causing significant increases in fuel and fertilizer costs for farmers due to inflation. Additionally, veterinary services previously provided by the government were gradually phased out and handed over to private companies. Both animal health and water commercialization led to the disappearance of livestock and herders, which were the backbone of the Somali economy. The policies implemented by the IMF and the World Bank, as in many countries, accelerated the deterioration of the Somali economy. Consequently, from 1975 to 1989, health expenditures decreased by nearly 80%. Turkey aimed to address Somalia's food problem not only through food aid, but also by making Somalia self-sufficient in food production. In 2012, TICA and IHH launched the Somali Agriculture School Project.
The Livestock and Agriculture Project began with the Agricultural Development Project, which included 2 to 3 month training programs on modern farming techniques, how to cultivate, use and implement them. This process, initiated through the collaboration of TICA and IHH, has now evolved into a university that is actively operating today.
More than 150 different seeds were brought from Turkey: cucumbers, parsley, eggplants and melons, which the Somali people had never seen before, began to be cultivated in Somali soil.
Turkey, along with the vegetables it brought, began to nurture the Somali people's hopes for the future. The fact that a people whose hopes had been stolen were starting to stand up again, with Turkey's help, also unsettled some interest groups.
3 suicide bombers attacked an annex of the Turkish embassy in Mogadishu and engaged in a clash with the police protecting the building. 1 police officer was martyred and 2 others were injured in the confrontation.
The attack on the embassy in Mogadishu on July 27, 2013, was essentially a warning message to Turkey, which was increasing its influence in Somalia.
In a country once remembered for hunger and famine, Turkey's efforts had led to the construction of hospitals, schools and roads. Somalia, which had been abandoned by the world, was reconnected to the global community with the resumption of Turkish Airlines flights. Those who wished for the chaos to continue in Somalia took action once again before Erdogan's second visit to the country. Just a few days before Prime Minister Erdogan's visit, another bomb attack targeted the hotel where the Turkish delegation was staying in Mogadishu. This attack was clearly a "Don't come to Somalia" message directed at Erdogan, who was planning to visit the country. However, despite the attack, Erdogan did not alter his plans and made his second visit to Somalia.
Despite all the difficulties and terrorist attacks, Turkey was not stepping back from Somalia. Was Turkey in Somalia solely for its own interests, like all the major powers?
Western powers, including the British and the French, exploited Africa as a colony for many years. In recent years, Eastern powers like Russia and China have also been trying to expand their influence in Africa. While the Russians are increasing their military presence on the continent, the Chinese are employing debt diplomacy by providing substantial loans to African countries with the intention of seizing key assets if these debts are not repaid.
So, while their methods may differ, the intentions of these powers remain centered on exploitation. What then is Turkey's objective?
We approach Africa with a very transparent agenda. We express our desire to collaborate with Africa through a win-win policy.
Now all countries, including officials in Turkey, use the term win-win policy, but in practice, Turkey has actually developed its own approach, though it hasn't named it yet. I refer to it as the give-to-win policy, where Turkey first helps Africans, And because of this help, Africans gain, and as they gain, they start to achieve shared success and win together.
That is why, as we never had exploitation as a part of our past and will never be in our future, we have concretely demonstrated to the world a model that exploitation states have neither achieved nor can achieve.
Africa needs companions rather than mentors. This is what our country is doing.
For example, the US and Western countries could bring democracy to any country, even if it meant invading that country. After all, they were developed nations. They had exploited some countries in the past to achieve their current power and wealth. Their strength made them feel justified in their actions. According to this view, if democracy was to come to a country, it could only be provided by developed nations. This attitude, which looks down on others, is a reflection of how not just individuals, but entire civilizations can be arrogant. Turkey also contributed to Somali democracy, but not in the same manner as Western civilization.
The construction of the Somali Federal Parliament building, a project that our Somali brothers and sisters will truly take pride in, will be completed swiftly by our team. This will also be a gift from the Republic of Turkey and the Turkish nation to Somalia.
Instead of claiming to bring democracy to Somalia, Turkey was handing over the legislative mechanism of the Somali state to its own will. Recently, Russia, which has shifted its focus to Africa, has been following a different policy from the Western powers.
Russia is increasing its influence in African countries by training their armies and protecting their underground resources from Western powers. Of course, in exchange for these underground resources. Don't be confused by Turkey opening its largest overseas military base in Somalia. Turkey's aim was to support the establishment of a Somali army capable of ensuring its own security without needing assistance from any other power.
With the construction of a military base by Tika, the infrastructure was established for training the staff officers there, including officers, non-commissioned officers, and all other personnel. Today, Somalia has become a country that, with its own state capacity, ensures its own security, combats terrorism, and alongside enhancing its state capacity beyond just security, efficiently spends the taxes it collects on development initiatives, advances its trade, and has become an increasingly growing and developing country in East Africa.
At this point, China is approaching Africa by leveraging its economic power. With so-called development promises, it puts African countries under heavy debt and seizes their assets. Turkey, on the other hand, aims to develop Africa through its investments without trapping countries in debt like China does.
Everything in the country was in ruins. After 20 years of devastation caused by war, the port was non-operational, the airport was non-operational, and there was no equipment, so no handling could take place. Then they handed the airport over to us, to the favored Turkish company. They also gave the seaport to our Al Bayrak company. We put in a lot of hard work there. We established a new system and a new order from scratch. We started generating significant revenues for Somalia's finances and treasury.
The Somali people have started to produce and sell on their own and have discovered the value of collaborating with states and companies that approach them ethically and justly, like Turkey.
Our presence, along with the presence of other countries, has provided employment opportunities and brought a sense of security to the people, boosting their confidence. We worked with our Somali partners in various construction projects, including hospital buildings, embassy construction, military facilities, and the parliament building. The craftsmen and workers who came from Turkey served as role models for them. Now, from our perspective and for the country, construction expertise has reached a level where it can be locally sourced. Currently, they are rapidly renovating their own buildings and, if needed, attracting investments back to their country. Afterward, a large embassy building had to be constructed because there was no suitable place.
We opened our largest diplomatic mission in the world in Somalia.
The Recep Tayyip Erdoğan Training and Research Hospital, which began serving in Somalia 8 years ago amid civil war and economic challenges, has provided healing to 12 million patients so far.
It is also a training and research hospital where Somali doctors are educated.
That visit not only changed the fate of Somalia, which was described by some as a failed state, but also of East Africa. We showed the world that when the necessary support is provided and sincere efforts are made, a nation can rise from its ashes.
What could explain a country approaching another country with such selflessness?
We should ask our African friends and brothers about this. They will provide the most accurate answer.
First and foremost, I want to express my deepest gratitude to them for treating us as equals and showing true brotherhood in our most challenging times. We truly regard them as our brothers who selflessly assisted us, and I sincerely hope to maintain our cherished bond together.
Certainly, it was a strange and unexpected event for the residents of Mogadishu. It felt as if we were in a dream, and suddenly we found ourselves waking up because we realized that we were part of the world. This sudden awareness that we were not isolated but actually part of the global community struck us as quite unusual and surprising. The realization that we were connected to the wider world was something we had not anticipated, and it seemed quite peculiar to us.
Thanks to Erdoğan's visit, other foreign heads of state were also encouraged to visit Somalia during such a challenging period.
We can say that they played a significant role in Somalia's transformation because they were the first nation to come with their own people to help us.
The most important feature of our aid policy and method, which distinguishes it from those of other countries, is that it directly addresses people and is carried out by our people setting foot directly on Somali and Mogadishu soil.
It might seem one-sided, but from a neutral perspective, Turkey's approach differs from that of current global players like China, Russia, European countries, and the United States. Turkey is a country that can give without taking anything in return.
The Republic of Turkey did not expect anything in return. It did not make any bargain.
This principle of selflessness is a quality we have inherited from our ancient Anatolian wisdom. It resonates deeply because we encounter African friends in many places who express this to us directly. You don't ask for anything in return. They even said, you get very tired and leave after finishing the project. This is something we're not very accustomed to. It's not something we're used to.
The Turkish development model, which we refer to, is characterized by the people's commitment derived from Anatolia's foundation culture and foundation civilization. They embraced everything, cared deeply, stayed there, and were not afraid.
Somalis described the situation like this. There was a dark cloud over Somalia, and the world couldn't see Somalia. President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's visit lifted that cloud, and Somalia became visible to the world. This is the most commonly used metaphor.
I choose to use these expressions specifically. As we establish a new world order, we want to walk together with Africa.